You know, I always thought my biggest battle would be against the relentless march of time, or maybe the occasional persistent weed. Never in a million years did I imagine I'd be engaged in an all-out ecological war in my own backyard. Armed with native plant guides and a healthy dose of outrage, all thanks to an HOA that mistook a neighborhood for a sterile corporate campus. Drop a comment below. Let me know if your HOA has ever tried to dictate what you can and can't grow on your own property. Because this story, folks, is a testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful battles are fought for the smallest, wildest corners of our homes. My name's Clara, and my home, nestled in the seemingly idyllic Willow Creek Estates, was my sanctuary. A retired botanist, I'd spent the last decade transforming my half-acre into a vibrant testament to local ecology. Think buzzing bees, fluttering butterflies, and a symphony of birdsong. My yard wasn't just a garden. It was a carefully curated ecosystem, a living painting of native wildflowers, swaying grasses, and a small, burbling pond teeming with life. It was a stark contrast to the meticulously manicured, chemically doused monocultures that dominated the rest of the neighborhood, and frankly, I was proud of it. My neighbors, for the most part, seemed to appreciate the splash of wild beauty, often stopping to admire a particularly vibrant patch of coneflowers or the occasional monarch butterfly fluttering past. Then came Beatrice Maxwell, or Bee, as she insisted we call her, though most of us just called her the committee. Bee had recently been elected head of the newly formed Community Aesthetic Committee. Now, Bee was a woman who clearly believed her ascension to this role was akin to a coronation. She was probably in her late 50s, with a helmet of suspiciously immovable blonde hair and a smile that was plastered on a cheap veneer over a house of cards. Her eyebrows were perfectly sculpted, like tiny, angry caterpillars planning world domination. She had an almost uncanny knack for sniffing out anything that deviated from her rigid vision of suburban perfection. Her fashion sense was like a car alarm, loud, insistent, and ignored by most. The first sign of trouble was a new HOA newsletter, ominously titled The Willow Creek Vision. It wasn't about community events or shared responsibilities. It was a thinly veiled manifesto on conformity. Bee's committee, it declared, would be implementing a uniform landscaping initiative to enhance property values and create a harmonious visual flow. This initiative, they explained, would involve a mandatory landscaping levy, a non-negotiable fee charged to every homeowner for the purpose of removing existing non-conforming vegetation and replacing it with HOA-approved, low-maintenance, aesthetically pleasing options. My blood ran cold when I read the accompanying diagram. Rows of identical, stunted shrubs, perfectly mulched beds, and an expanse of golf course green grass, all utterly devoid of life. It was a barren, soulless landscape, designed for ease of maintenance, not for living. I knew immediately what this meant for my beloved backyard. It was a direct assault on everything I cherished. My first instinct was to engage, to educate. I compiled binders of scientific studies, ecological reports, and even testimonials from local wildlife organizations. I highlighted the benefits of native plants, their resilience, their minimal water requirements, their crucial role in supporting local fauna. I even brought in photographs of the vibrant life my yard attracted, hoping to appeal to a sense of shared responsibility for the environment. I presented all of this at the next HOA meeting, feeling a flicker of hope as a few neighbors nodded along. But Bee was unyielding. Her advice was like a public restroom, widely available, but you probably shouldn't use it. She dismissed my arguments with a dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand. "Clara, dear," she simpered, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "While we appreciate your enthusiasm for nature, Willow Creek Estates is about elegance, uniformity. We simply cannot have wild, untamed patches disrupting our carefully cultivated aesthetic. And think of the property values." She kept repeating property values like a mantra, as if it were a magical incantation that would make all dissent disappear. Her words felt like tiny, sharp pebbles dropped onto a glass table, each one chipping away at my patience. Then came the notices. First, a courtesy warning about overgrowth and unapproved plant species. Then, the fines. Each one escalating, demanding I pay for the privilege of having my garden ripped out and replaced with their sterile vision. My mailbox became a graveyard of demands and threats. My attempts to befriend usually ended with me being ignored, or worse, condescended to. She dressed for success, I thought, but success seemed to be avoiding her like a telemarketer. I tried rallying the neighbors. Many were sympathetic, whispering their support. But few were willing to openly defy Bee. Her reach was pervasive, and her tactics intimidating. She collected friends like lint, some useful, most just clinging on. The mandatory neighborhood watch Bee had established only further fostered a climate of suspicion, with residents forced into patrols and reporting violations. It felt like an unlicensed snoop squad, and I knew my backyard was their prime target. One evening, I found an official-looking notice taped to my front door. It wasn't a fine, it was a work order. Bee's committee had voted to proceed with the uniform landscaping of my property, and the work crew would arrive in 2 weeks. They were going to bulldoze my native garden, my sanctuary. The audacity of it, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of assuming they could just take over my property. That night, I barely slept. I scrolled through legal precedents, HOA bylaws, Environmental Protection Acts. My mind raced, searching for an angle, a loophole, anything. And then, a flicker of an idea. Very large, very unimpressed idea. I recalled a little-known clause in the original Willow Creek Estates charter, dating back decades before the current HOA. It stated that properties originally zoned as agricultural parcels within the development retained certain rights regarding cultivation and livestock, provided they adhered to health and safety regulations. My half-acre, it turned out, was one of those very few. It was a long shot, a relic from a time when this area was still dotted with small farms, but it was a shot. The next morning, I made a call to a friend from my university days, a shrewd environmental lawyer named David. He loved a good underdog story, especially one involving bureaucratic overreach. He delved into the archives, confirming my suspicion. My parcel indeed had a unique historical zoning. "Clara," he said, "this is wild. You could argue for an agricultural exemption. My agricultural exemption would allow me to maintain cultivated land for agricultural purposes, which, broadly interpreted, could include native plant propagation for ecological benefit. But to truly solidify the claim, to make it undeniable, I needed something more tangible, something that screamed agricultural. That's when I remembered my cousin, a passionate beekeeper on a rural farm just outside the county. He had recently been complaining about the dwindling bee populations in his area and was looking for new, healthy foraging grounds. An idea bloomed, far more vibrant than any of Bee's manicured petunias. David drafted a formal letter to the HOA, citing the agricultural exemption and my intent to establish a sustainable apiary and native plant sanctuary for educational and ecological research purposes. He included a detailed plan, complete with diagrams of beehive placement and a list of the native flowering plants crucial for a thriving bee colony. The letter was polite, professional, and utterly unyielding. Bee's reaction was predictable. She stormed to my door, clipboard in hand, looking like she'd just swallowed a lemon. "Bees, Clara, are you quite mad, Bees? In Willow Creek Estates, think of the allergies, the stings, the liability." Her voice rose to a shrill, indignant pitch. Her smile was gone, replaced by a contorted mask of fury. "My agricultural exemption, Bee," I stated calmly, holding up a copy of David's letter. "It permits the cultivation of crops and, by extension, the means to pollinate them. Bees are essential for pollination, and my native plants provide excellent forage." She sputtered, her face turning a mottled red. "This is preposterous. You can't just Just bring livestock into a suburban neighborhood? Paisant livestock in the traditional sense. B, I replied, a small, satisfied smile playing on my lips. They're vital pollinators. And my property, by its historical zoning, is uniquely suited for such an endeavor. The final confrontation came at the next HOA meeting, 2 days before B's landscaping crew was scheduled to arrive. The room was packed, buzzing with nervous energy. B, standing at the podium, her usual air of imperious authority, seemed to waver slightly when she saw David, a picture of calm professionalism, sitting beside me. As you all know, B began, her voice tight, Mrs. Davies has been uncooperative regarding the new landscaping initiative. She has now escalated matters with a truly absurd proposal to turn her property into some kind of bee farm. A murmur went through the crowd. David then stood, addressing the board with quiet authority. He laid out the legal facts, the historical zoning, the environmental benefits. He even brought up the potential positive impact on property values from having a certified wildlife habitat in the neighborhood. A subtle jab at B's favorite mantra. Then I spoke. I didn't talk about laws or bylaws. I spoke about the robins that sang their songs with the cheerful persistence of tiny, feathered alarm clocks. I spoke about the delicate ladybugs that landed on my hand. I spoke about the joy of watching ducks waddle in my pond, because sometimes simple things are the best. I spoke about community, about the small moments of beauty we all shared, and how B's sterile vision would strip that away. I reminded them that an HOA is supposed to serve the community, not rule it like a petty dictatorship. A few days later, B tried one last desperate maneuver. She called the county, alleging public health hazards from the bees. But I had already submitted my apiary registration, meticulously followed all regulations, and even secured a letter of support from the County Agricultural Extension Office. Her claims were quickly dismissed. The landscaping crew arrived on schedule, not for my property, but for a different section of Willow Creek Estates. B was there, overseeing them, her back ramrod straight, but her usual imperious stride seemed to have lost its bounce. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee, as a small green delivery truck pulled up to my driveway. 2 men carefully unloaded 2 perfectly constructed, brightly painted beehives. Word spread quickly through Willow Creek Estates about my bee farm. Far from being a nuisance, the bees became a source of fascination for many. Parents would bring their children to peek safely from the sidewalk at the industrious insects. I started leaving small jars of honey on my porch with notes. From the Willow Creek bees. The honey disappeared quickly, often replaced by notes of thanks or small gifts. B. Maxwell's reign on the Community Aesthetic Committee was short-lived. The mandatory landscaping levy, now seen as her petty vendetta against my garden, was voted down. Her attempts to impose her will further were met with increasing resistance from residents who had found their voice. Soon after, B's house went up for sale. Her lawn, I noticed, was still perfectly manicured, but it now seemed stark and empty. She didn't say a word when she finally drove away, just shot one last look at my buzzing backyard. Willow Creek Estates is a different place now. The oppressive atmosphere is gone, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. People are planting what they like in their flower beds. Garden hoses are coiled with casual imperfection, and the only patrols are neighbors out for a friendly stroll. My porch light meets my own ambient luminescent standards. And my welcome mat is just the right shade of welcoming. It just goes to show, never underestimate a quiet botanist with a knack for investigation and a very good reason to fight back. Sometimes, all it takes to remind them of that is a little historical zoning, a good environmental lawyer, and a couple of thousand very busy, very unimpressed bees.